Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to SIMA Fun Webinar Live on LinkedIn and X. Today we'll be discussing a very important topic, and the conversation will be around navigating career challenges for women in the financial service industry. So my name is Bukola, and I feel very honored to moderate this session. With me, I have three incredible esteemed professionals in the financial sector. They will share with us, their experience so far in the years, and allow me to introduce them to us so that we can hear from their experience and also learn from them. So first, we have Preeti Bhattacharji. She's the head of sustainable investments at JPMorgan. She brings over a decade of experience in stewarding sustainable investments across various asset classes and return profile. Oh my God. Our expertise lies in incorporating sustainability in investment portfolio and developing thought leadership in this domain. Next to me, I have Nyasha Muimi, the managing director at Finenergi Advisory Services. Nyasha has more than 2 decades of experience in auditing, financing corporate transactions, and infrastructure projects across multiple sectors. She has worked with various government departments, public utilities, as well as private investors and developers across Africa. And lastly, I have Amruta Taley, Senior Vice President at our own very SIMA fund. Amruta has over 15 years of experience in banking and financial services, primarily focusing on infrastructure and renewable project funding. Our extensive background includes pivotal roles in business development, credit appraisal, and risk assessment. Now, without further ado, we will dive into our questions and we can start the conversation. And so, our first question, so we'll be discussing around employment and career progression challenges. So, like any other industry, the financial service industry as well, women encounter various obstacles when it comes to securing employment and progressing in their careers. This hurdle may include stereotypes, bias in hiring practice, and limited opportunities for growth. It is crucial to address these challenges to create a more inclusive industry. So, Yasha, starting with you, what challenges or bias are you familiar with that women face at the time of employment, especially for senior roles in the industry?
Right, it's good to start, hey? Yeah, so I think one of the key things is that we don't negotiate well. We're not as good as negotiators as our male counterparts. So you find that when you negotiate your base salary as a start, it's almost like you take whatever is on the table, whatever is offered, and you leave quite a lot of money on the table. And that already affects how your other benefits will be calculated or based on. And even as you stay longer in the firm or organization and all of that, it's always based on where you started. So I think that's one of the issues that we have on the jump. So we don't negotiate well on the base salary, leave days, study days, those things. And when our male counterparts have that, you almost feel like you're cheated, and yet it was actually us who didn't do enough research on what can I actually ask for based on my experience. You almost sort of discount your experience or whatever, and you are on the back foot in that regard. So I think that's where we fall short on, or that's one of the challenges we have at the beginning of employment.
Okay. So I would also like to hear maybe if any other member of the panelists would like to contribute one or two things that Yasha had said. Yasha, thank you very much for that contribution.
Okay.
I'm happy to build on that. I think that commentary is spot on, that all the research shows that women tend to negotiate at lower salaries, unfortunately, than their male counterparts. In terms of specific things we can all do to close that gap, there are two things I would point to. Number one, increasingly, especially in markets like New York, there's a requirement to actually post salary bands on job descriptions. And so when you're thinking about doing that research, find competing organizations, find their old job descriptions, figure out what those salary bands are, and negotiate at the top of those bands. I think that is key number one, to just equip yourself for having those data points in your pocket, in part because for a lot of social reasons, I think men often talk more freely about their compensation with one another than women do. Often we're socialized not to do so. And so in the spirit of figuring out how to actually get a hold of that data, look at those job descriptions, find the markets. New York is one of them, where the salary bands now have to be disclosed. So pull those old job descriptions, number one. Number two, related to that point, talk about your compensation with your close friends, with the women in your network. This doesn't get better unless we're actually able to share those numbers. I think I was certainly taught that isn't polite. I think a lot of women are taught that's not polite. Meanwhile, a lot of our male counterparts are chatting about what their compensation is and negotiating and bragging about it. And it just gives them more data to equip them for those negotiations. So find your crew, people you trust, people you feel camaraderie with. And especially as those of us are getting more senior in the space, like share that information with more junior people. As analysts and associates come up into the space, I tell them what I make. By the way, this is an open call on a streaming platform. Like if you want to have that conversation and you're young and you're in the industry, call us, ask us what we make. These are data points we all need to be more transparent about as we think about moving up in the space and equipping each other to have those negotiations. And the last thing I'll say about that is, as you think about equipping for those negotiations as well, ask more senior mentors what they make. And those mentors don't just have to be women. I think one of the traps that I fell into early in my career is I assumed all of my mentors had to be women, and particularly women of color, because I saw myself in them. But the painful truth is there's just not that many of us in the space, particularly in those very senior roles, because 10 years ago, there were even fewer of us in the space. And so I artificially limited my pool of mentorship to people who looked like me. And in hindsight, I realized by broadening my mentor pool, I was actually able to pull those salary data points from a broader group of people as well, which again helped create a little bit more parity when it came to negotiating. So I would offer all of those as concrete ways to try to just improve the cards in your hand when you are coming to the negotiating table.
Thank you.
Just to add on to what Preeti mentioned, it's true that in financial services, networking and relationship building, they're very critical for your career advancement. And women may face challenge in accessing the same networking opportunities as their male counterparts have. So considering there are so few women at the top, so definitely networking is a must. And just to add on to that, I feel that there are some certain gender-based expectations and some preconceived notions which create a bias against women in leadership positions. So women leader, I feel they may be held to different standards than their male counterparts. They might be perceived as too assertive or maybe not assertive enough. So historically, I feel the qualities like assertiveness, decisiveness, and directness, it has been associated with effective leadership. But these traits are more often readily accepted in men than in women. So when women display assertive behavior, that may be viewed as aggressive, which can create negative perceptions about them.
Thank you very much. So I think one of the things I picked up personally is transparency. So even among women, we should be transparent enough to discuss our compensation with other people, especially from this part of the world where I am from, in Nigeria, Africa. We are very secretive about some information. You are not comfortable sharing how much you earn so that people don't, look at you in some level. So I think for me personally, one of the things I've picked is being transparent, and also more senior people should also be more transparent. So and it starts from the grassroots. So once you're transparent at the more junior level, it makes it much easier for you to become transparent even as a senior person. So thank you very much for those ideas and insights. Okay, so still on this topic, so now we'll move to career progression, and my question will be directed at Preeti this time around. So I will be talking about how women overcome the biases that limit them from being promoted to senior roles within the industry. And so my question is, um, how do you think women can overcome these challenges in terms of progressing in your career as a junior person into more senior roles?
It's a great question and an incredibly hard one. I will be uncharacteristically optimistic for a moment and say the good news is it's getting better and it is getting easier. 10 years ago, when I started in the space, it was there were a lot fewer of us, and I think the inroads are improving. And especially in that context where I think it's getting better, one of the pieces of advice I would have is assume good intent. And by that, I mean, I've been, just to make it concrete, I've been in a lot of rooms where I'm the only woman. And often in those rooms, people talk about sports, people talk about their wives, people talk about things that make me feel alienated. And for many years in my career, that made me angry and frustrated. And I didn't know how to navigate it. And I was angry at all of them for what felt like a deliberate set of microaggressions. And don't get me wrong, those are often microaggressions. But as I got older, I realized, and frankly, as the space evolved and as everybody got more sophisticated in this conversation, I realized that often they're not doing it on purpose. They're just speaking to their lived experience. And so once I actually learned to release some of that anger and release some of that frustration and assume good intent, I was actually able to engage and network very differently. And to be able to meet people where they are, which actually helped unlock a lot more opportunities and conversations and doors for me, because I went from sitting there fuming going, oh, look at you all talking about your golf outing last weekend and you're complaining about your wives, like clearly you're doing that to isolate me, to me saying, hey, I actually know nothing about golf, but I know about restaurants. And like, let's talk about this cool new restaurant that opened down the street. Or like, I could complain about my husband too. You want to complain about spouses? Let's have that conversation. And for me, that was actually a mental shift. And it's awful that we have to do that mental gymnastics, but I did find doing that emotional work, doing that mental work for myself actually unlocked a lot more opportunities for me and helped me find those allies for those people in the room who, again, weren't doing it deliberately, had good intent, and were eager to meet me where I was as well.
Thank you very much. So it's also, as women, we should work on how we think and not just base our assumption on, oh, these people are just trying to push me out. So we should work on our mental capacity as well. Thank you very much. We'll go to another very critical and unfortunately very common discriminating factor, the gender pay gap.
Sorry,
When-
Bukola, before
Okay,
you move on,
okay.
I detail everything that Preeti said. Sorry. I would also add that sometimes we need to add our voice where it matters, when it matters. And you see there's an issue because you are doing the work, as a junior or middle management person. Be that person who can create papers and present to your team leaders or managers, and they associate you with being a problem solver and you being that voice, that face for that. I think for a long time in my own career, I thought that my work would speak for itself. I'm a hard worker. I get things across the line, pretty much perfectly, and yet it's not the case. So over and above you doing what is expected, they do expect you to do that. Be that voice that adds value to the team, to the organization, and all of that. It's another way of networking and also getting out of your shell for us introverts who might struggle a bit in networking. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I will go to the gender pay gap. So women continue to earn less than their male counterparts for similar roles, affecting not only their financial stability, it also enable social inequality. Therefore, this issue call for our collective attention and effort towards achieving pay equity, and within the financial service industry and beyond. So, I will move this question first to Amruta. So what are your thoughts on the gender pay gap within the finance industry? And have you encountered disparities in pay or opportunities based on gender? Thank you.
Thanks, Bukola. So I think, in my opinion, there are various factors which are contributing to this gender pay gap or for any opportunity pay gap for that matter. And it may not be specific to the financial industry, but in general. So I feel the most critical phase of your career, which forms the base for the future, it intersects with your family timeline. This, I feel, it creates an unconscious bias against women in terms of recruitment or promotions or any other opportunity for that matter. And in this factor, I feel in this aspect, men definitely have an advantage over women. And we are donning several hats at the same time, caregiving for kids or senior citizens. It leads to burnout. And that's why it is in general across sectors, we have seen that the female workforce is more likely to face a career drift or drop out at the middle management level. While taking up new responsibilities also or new opportunities, women more likely give importance to factors such as whether it is proximity to the workplace or suitable work timings, which hinders their career progression. I feel the gender pay gap also stems from a mindset which feels that women's income is secondary contributor to the family income. This factor came up during one of my appraisal discussions in the previous organization, and I was a bit taken aback and shocked at the response. But I think this perception is rooted deeply in traditional gender roles, wherein the society places greater emphasis on men as primary breadwinners. However, I feel this perception is slowly evolving as the society is progressing, and as more and more women are pursuing education and career opportunities. I feel what is working towards reducing this gender pay gap or opportunity gap. I think the initiatives such as which are centered around recruitment of female workforce, their retention, mentoring of female workforce, and their advancement into leadership roles. So these initiatives are greatly helping towards this cause. And also gender-friendly workplace policies. They like flexi work hours or work from home options. They are really critical and crucial in bringing this parity.
I would echo that 100%. And just as we think about workplace benefits, I think one of the underappreciated benefits, but we often talk about maternity leave and parental leave. I think that's really important. I think one of the underappreciated benefits is paternity leave. And I say that from experience. When I had a child, I took maternity leave, as many of us often do, if we're fortunate enough to have it. But the reason I was able to go back to work is because my husband then was able to take paternity leave of an equal time frame. And so I got my 5 months off, but then he was able to take 5 months off as well, which enabled me to fully go back to work. And so as we think about, again, being leaders in organizations and think about the benefits that matter, absolutely maternity leave matters, but I cannot stress enough how important paternity is as well, because otherwise you don't actually have parity in the home, and you cannot have parity in the workplace if you do not have parity at home.
Totally agree with that.
Thank you. 5 months paternity. That's interesting. I think that's the first time I'm hearing that. Okay. Before we move on to the next question, so the next question is actually to you, Preeti, and I think is also similar to what we've been discussing. So it's basically, how can women negotiate for fair and equal compensation and benefits? So once you identify that there is a gap, how do you then negotiate for? I think you've spoken to some of it, but if you just like to add one or two things at this point.
Yeah, I think we covered some best practices around, first of all, do your homework, collect as much data as possible. And in my experience, this is actually where many of the women I know excel. Like, we do the work, we do the research, we build the binders, we build the data sets. I think there's some really impressive data collection tendencies among the phenomenal women I know in the space. So I would almost say that's the easy part, doing the homework. Then comes the hard part of naming it and negotiating it, which goes against all of the socializing that most of us have been raised into around being polite, being nice, being deferential, being demure, and in many ways for the exact reasons Amruta outlined, which is we're often penalized if we're not those things. We're told we're mean, we're aggressive. And so having done the homework, now you get to the emotionally complicated, politically fraught piece of naming it and negotiating it. And so some guidelines I've received, which I think have served me well, are, first of all, be very explicit when you name it. let your supervisor know, like, here are the data points, have your homework, have your memo outlined. Here's why I think I deserve what I deserve. Here's the business I brought in. Here's what I know peers are making. Here's what I see alternatives are making. By the way, one of the best ways to have those data points is to make sure you're interviewing at other places as well. Like if you have offers at other places, there's no way to get your employer to pay attention like having an offer letter from somewhere else. So having all of that kind of ready and being able to make your case in a very data-driven way, it's piece number one. And then piece number two, I will say is somewhat has been personal for me. I really struggled with the emotional component of that. I had all this imposter syndrome and got in my head and was trying to figure out how to be aggressive but not too aggressive. And that I just felt like I was emotionally tangled up in knots trying to figure out how to have those conversations. The thing that really cleared the way for me was getting an executive coach who helped me work through a lot of that emotional work. And so, especially for other women in the space, I often encourage them to do what was a huge unlock for me, which is get an executive coach. And that coach can help you work through how to have those conversations, figure out who you want to be in those conversations, how to actually position your brand in a way that is clear and authentic and forceful, without necessarily overstepping into a more aggressive territory than you might want to be in. And so, especially as you get kind of past the associate level into VP and those mid and senior tiers, having an executive coach who can work on you with the emotional component, in addition to the logistical component, I found that to be a really helpful unlock.
Thank you very much. So, Aisha, do you have any contribution to this topic, or we could just move on to our next question? So, if we have any other comments from either Amruta or Nyasha, so if there is none, okay. So I'll just move on to a very critical aspect, which is based on the impact of personal life events. So women often face career interruption due to personal events like marriage or motherhood, requiring them to balance these responsibilities with their career aspiration, which for a lot of women, it's actually very difficult. You see a lot of women having to take maybe a career break. You know, some might even have to resign. Some can't even balance. I've had a couple of friends that after maternity leave, they really just don't feel like going back to work again because they don't want to leave their newborn child. So I'll move this question to Nyasha. Considering personal events such as marriages, starting a family, or caretaker responsibilities, how do this impact your career? And have you at any point faced biases or challenges due to these personal events?
If I'm going to be perfectly honest, I've actually had a very supportive, firm colleagues whenever life happened, you know, and in particular, like when I lost very close relatives, you know, people actually give you that space. So yes, you've got that family or grieving leave that you can apply for, but over and above that, you know, people are gentle on you and like, you know what, if you need to work from home for some time or different office space, do that. And I've seen that, and it's I don't know whether I'm fortunate to have experienced that or to have had that supporting sort of framework in the places I used to work. But what I do think is that we should form, as women, we should form part of the policy making, HR policies, whatever, within the firm, and be very intentional about it, right? Because we are the most impacted, right? In terms of some of these examples you've given, like caretaking, caregiving to a loved one, maybe to your parent or a close relative, and of course the maternity leave. I mean, my jaw dropped when Preeti said she took 5 months off for maternity and her husband took 5 months of paternity, and I'm like, oh, that's a dream. And yet, you know, here we are lucky if a guy can get 1 week paternity, you know, leave, and that anxiety of leaving your child whilst you're, you know, back in the office, and you'll be lucky to even get the position that you left. You know, it's not always guaranteed. So I think we should, as we get into these firms, and or even as we interview, you know, just ask what they are and be the influence to change some of these things. I would even take it as far as, you know, make it, talk to your counselors and lawmakers, so that some of these laws change, because most homes in 2023 do work on two incomes, and not one. So it's very myopic to think that women have a secondary role to play, and yet they're actually carrying some weight. So yeah, I think that's my 2 cents. Let's be part of the change. Let's influence policy making within the organization as well as in the country. Yeah.
Thank you. Very, very valid point. Because from my own experience, I've seen someone lost a promotion just because she was on maternity leave, and our team lead, funny enough, was also a woman, which we'll still dive into that question. Just felt, oh, I can't promote you because we're off work for 3 months. I'd rather promote other people that were around working, so then I have to move your promotion to the following year. So we see that happening a lot, especially from my own experience here in Nigeria. It happens. So a lot of bosses would have to maybe push your promotion. You see someone that you start your career together, the guy is maybe 2 steps ahead of you, or maybe someone that is still single is two step ahead of you because they've not gone on maternity leave, or they've not had those, especially when it comes to maternity leave, because you're off work for about 3 or 4 months. So there's always that impact. So I think it's also very important. Luckily, we have a lot of women in the HR. So I think that would also help us in terms of tackling this issue. So the next question is basically around ambition gap from female workforce. I think it's still similar to what we've been discussing. So I think you've spoken about it, but I'll just push the baton over to Preeti as well. Um, so have you encountered moments of self doubt or lack confidence in your career? And how did you navigate these feelings?
How much time do we have? The short answer is yes. And by the way, I think the answer for everybody is yes. And that's not just true of women. Like, most of the men I know also at some point have self-doubt. Like, this is just the reality of it. And part of the reason I'm saying that out loud is I want to normalize that, because at least the cycles I've been through are, I have self-doubt, and then I start self-flagellating for having that self-doubt and going, oh, I shouldn't have self-doubt. Men wouldn't have self-doubt, but that's not true. We all have self-doubt. That's just a human thing. And so if you feel self-doubt, don't beat yourself up over it. Like, that, you don't need that on top of everything else. It's okay. You got to work through it. And again, this is where I'll put in a place for executive coaching, where I think having an executive coach who can help you work through that is really, really helpful. And again, at least for me personally, one of the things I realized in the coaching process is to overcome that self-doubt, I needed to feel like I was really crisp on my quantitative skills. That's a place where it felt like, especially as a woman, I needed to be able to flex and frankly outperform some of my male colleagues. And so I took those additional quantitative classes. I took those stats classes and those corporate finance classes and those accounting classes at a higher degree than I probably even needed for my job. And candidly, I was terrified to take those classes. Like, those are not classes I was encouraged to take growing up as a woman. And so especially kind of discovering mathematics in my 20s was a terrifying thing and really scary. But I knew I had to do that in order to get that level of confidence and overcome that self-doubt. So I could sit in a room across from a male counterparty, and when they were spitting stats at me, know I could internalize them and spit them right back. So again, both the emotional component of the coaching combined with the quantitative skills to know that I could hold my own in those conversations, that's really how I moved through that phase of my career.
Okay, thank you very much. So moving on, I would go to Amruta for this question. So how do you think women can balance work life? There's something we call work life balance, especially during the demanding phases of your career. So how do you think women should be able to balance their work and their life at this stage? Thank you.
I think this question should be posed to women and men equally. But yeah, as a woman, I think professional work is one of the many critical priorities and responsibilities that we are handling on a daily basis. So I think that's where a career drift is common in women. So unless you like define your goal or what according to you is success, if you don't define that, it's easy to find yourself overworked, overwhelmed with tasks, and drift slowly into a burnout. So I feel knowing and embracing your strengths and limitations, it is a challenge, but once you define them, it helps you to stay focused on what are your priorities. And while making these choices or giving priority to one over the other, women tend to have a higher guilt factor, especially mothers. Like if you are missing out on any milestone of your child, or if you are unable to attend to any family commitment, it should be normalized to be, it's okay to miss out on a couple of things at certain point of time. And it is crucial to make these conscious compromises to maintain a work life balance. So, in my opinion, when you're juggling so many things on professional and personal front and sailing through a demanding phase, it can never be a solo act. I feel you need to build your support system or a community around you who help you to maintain a perspective in your life. And having clarity on what you want and creating boundaries, it helps you define and stay focused on how to move ahead. And that's how I think in my personal life also I try to maintain that balance.
Okay, thank you very much. So I just saw that we actually have two questions from one of our live audience, and the question is directed at Nyasha. So the question is, are women in Africa worse off than women in Asia, Europe, or America? I think that was in line with what you talked about. So the question was, do we think women in Africa are worse off than women in Asia, Europe, or America? Then, most importantly, how do we make these improvements? How do we make women better? In terms of being outspoken, able to basically fight for their rights or what they need. So I will leave you to answer that.
Right. It's very that's a very difficult question simply because Africa is not one country. There are 54 countries in it, and each jurisdiction has its own peculiarities. And then in Europe, it's a different ball game altogether, and they're more of 50-50, etc. So it's quite different. I'm not so sure about Asia, but I would like to think they're similar to us in Africa simply because of our cultural identities, how we defer to men culturally, etc. So I'd like to think when you're navigating these tough conversations, we tend to fear the same issues, right? And yet we kind of have to step out of that and speak up. I can't say who is worse off because each place has its own issues. I'm sure if we're to compare someone who's working in the US, like Preeti, and somebody who's working in Europe, she has 10 days of leave a year. In Europe, I had 30, okay, or 25 to 30 days. In South Africa, we have at least 22 days, at least. It could be up to 30. So, I mean, we can all cry differently, but I think at the end of the day, we just need to be intentional. If something is not right, remember, don't defer the problem to someone else for someone else to solve. Be the change you want to see. And it doesn't have to be dramatic, but it can start off with a coffee with somebody and then move on to, look, I'm doing a paper. Some of us are academics like that. So we like to present things and once you play with PowerPoint in front of a couple of people, you tend to impress people like that, right? That sort of thing. So I think start where you are. Just start where you are and just be the change you want to see. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Africa is actually very diverse. Some are more aggressive, some are more calm and quiet. So it's very difficult to just speak generally for Africa. Okay, so I will go to something we've kind of discussed about. So is mentorship. So mentorship plays a vital role in career development, and having access to mentor and role model can provide invaluable guidance, support, and inspiration for women navigating the complexities of their career. So, Preeti, I'm talking about the significance of mentorship, particularly female mentors. How important is it to you? Have you ever felt a lack of female mentorship or role model in your career journey?
I think mentorship is critical. And I've actually been lucky enough to have a parade of really phenomenal mentors, some of whom have been women. Um, and they themselves have often been the only women in the room. They came up in a career where it was even more isolating to be a woman. And so, yes, having female mentors who have been able to coach me through that experience and prepare me for that experience, and sometimes just have solidarity in that experience. Like there's something to be said for just, they couldn't do anything about it, but we could have a drink after and be like, oh God, I know, I'm all right. Like even that, having that sense of community has been deeply helpful. And so I cannot underscore enough how valuable that has been. Um, that being said, I had mentioned this earlier. I think it took me too long to realize that my mentors don't all have to be women. And in a world where I thought they all had to be women, it really limited me because there's just not enough of us in the space, which is the problem we're all trying to solve for. And so opening myself up to mentorship from other people who don't look like me, who don't have the same gender experience or racial experience as me, actually gave me a lot more opportunities. And by the way, helped me create authentic connections with people who I didn't realize wanted to be allies. One of the best mentors I have had to this day is a American white male mentor who, when I was dealing not with childcare, but with elder care, I had aging parents and my mother got sick. And so when I was dealing with end of life care with my mother, which is a very common thing that women have to handle, it was this male American mentor who really stepped in and had my back and made sure that he gave me air cover to be absent from work for a long period of time. And so like that was an authentic form of allyship and support that I will forever be grateful for. He truly had my back in that context. And so, yes, absolutely. Female mentors, incredibly important, incredibly empowering, also helpful for solidarity. Representation matters. But don't do what I did and overly limit yourself to only having female mentors, because there are some men out there who really want to have your back as well if you give them space to do so.
Thank you very much. That was very insightful. So finally, let's discuss gender-friendly workplace policies. Implementing policies such as flexible work hour, parental leave, and zero tolerance for discrimination creates an environment where women feel valued, supported, and empowered to thrive professionally. So I will go to Amruta. Could you highlight specific examples showcasing the tangible benefits of such policies, and how can organizations make these policies more effective?
So I think these flexi policies, flexi timings, flexi work hours, they enhance your work-life balance, and it also helps a lot in talent acquisition and retention. It overall, I think these flexi policies play a very important role in fostering a very positive dimension to the organizational culture. However, I feel the overall having these policies is one thing, but ensuring that these policies are effective, it often depends on how they are designed, how they are implemented, and an ongoing basis. It has to be kept in check regarding the commitment from the top management, whether how effective the policies which they have designed and implemented are truly there. So I think the way there should be no bias against anyone who is availing the flexi policies. So if people are not open enough, or they are having a fear at the back of the mind while availing these flexi policies, then the purpose is not met. And also, there are many transparent pay policies like the way we have in SIMA. I think it also helps to address the gender pay gaps, and it brings in greater parity in terms of compensation also amongst the employees.
Thank you very much, Amrita. So I would also like to throw it open to Preeti and Nyasha if you have any further contribution to this topic.
I think we've touched on a few of them already. Again, I think the policy that supports women the most that we don't talk about enough is paternity leave. It influences everything from hiring to ability to stay in the workforce. And so, yes, absolutely, increased maternity leave. Nyasha was mentioning here in the United States, we have atrocious maternity leave policies that desperately needs to get improved, but also thinking about paternity leave in the same breath, because I couldn't have stayed in the workplace if I hadn't had strong paternity leave allowing me to do so.
Okay, thank you. What about Nyasha? Do you have any additional points to this?
To the policy, I think I've said it already. I do want to underscore the mentorship aspect, right? I do believe us women are a bit weird when it comes to mentorship. You know, you get some stranger coming up to you and say, could you please be my mentor? It's just so weird. And yet when you see the guys, how they move, they just grab a coffee, go for a beer over lunch, and they're chatting away with the bosses, right? And that's how they sort of have a mentor. And a mentor is somebody who just helps you carve your career, right? Who makes you, draft that difficult picture, helps you see what you really want. And in tandem to that, I would like to underscore the need for a sponsor, the person who advocates for you when you're not there, the person who feels sorry, will be like, no ways, Preeti cannot take on more because she's already got a lot on her plate. She's got things going on, right? Somebody who will speak for you where it matters the most. And through that, you can then progress in your career. So for a while in my career, I was quite stagnant until I understood the role of a sponsor. Somebody who just says, but hey, this person is 1, 2, 3, and yet she's not XYZ, So I think in this conversation, if anything, please take away the need to have a mentor and also a sponsor, someone who will speak for you in places that you don't necessarily go into.
Thank you. So I will ask a further question on that. In terms of mentorship, we've spoken on how we can get mentors. We can reach out to people to say, hey, okay, I want you to be my mentor. But in terms of sponsorship or someone being your sponsor, how do you have that kind of person? How do you assess that kind of person? So for some people, they are lucky enough, to have maybe line managers or their boss that could actually speak for them. When you have a boss that is very vocal, very aggressive, that really value you and would go all the way to fight for you. And there are some cases that we also have line managers or bosses that are relatively quiet. Let me say they're introverts. They wouldn't even fight for themselves, not talk of fighting for a team member. So how do you then navigate that space, or how do you then get a sponsor or someone that can speak for you?
Is that to me or to everyone else?
Yeah, to you. Yeah, every other person could contribute, but I think you mentioned majorly a sponsor, so that's why I asked you.
Okay, so for me, I think when you're in an organization, you need to know the nooks and crooks, who's who in the zoo at some point, right? And you might not know this very well in the first year or so, but if you stay long enough, you then know that whatever we're thinking of, whatever happens when this person shows up, things happen. Or they might even go in a different direction and it works out, So I think be observant and see whom can I grow an organic relationship with, like, hi, how are you? Want to ask you a question. It can always start like that, and see how it goes. Test the chemistry between the two. Some people can be abrasive and too abrasive and you can't deal, and others are more accommodating. But there have to be people who speak or have some authority which could come to your benefit if needed. So don't have these blinkers on. I'm just doing my work. I'm an associate. I do the number crunching 24/7 and that's it. Observe, go for lunch. For so long, I used to just stay at my desk and not go out for lunch and with my colleagues and all of that. That's not a great idea. Link up with people, network, and see see your organization for what it is, what it offers. So for me, having worked in a big firm, that made sense to do it that way. In other places, it could be outside your workplace. It could be in the environment of your church, or other hobby or whatever. And you interact with people from all sorts of backgrounds, and you realize, oh, okay, I'm interacting. I go to the gym with the CEO of this company. Why not just grab coffee? Say, hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I have a question. How did you get there? Or what should I do? I've got a question. People like being approached with problems to solve. I've noticed that it's a nice way to say, oh, okay, so you really think I'm a guru in this? Oh, thanks. I really want to help you to fix it. So that's what I have seen works for me, or worked for me, in the recent past.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other addition, contribution to that? Okay. So I think this has been a very insightful section. I personally have learned a lot of things. Networking is very important. So for me personally, that's one thing I'm very lucky. I get to have bosses that like me and they really want me to reach out. Even in my previous organization, when I'm leaving, they keep telling me, ensure you reach out. And I end up not reaching out. Maybe I just reach out probably once after leaving. And these are pretty senior people, like executive. For you to be an executive director in a Nigerian bank, you're a very senior person. But I think I've also more like a reminder that I should learn to network better and relate more with people. And I also believe that every other person that listens had also, gained something insightful. So on this note, I would just like to thank Preeti, Amruta, and Nyasha for this incredible session, and we also appreciate everybody that's joined us today. And I really hope that this conversation, helps us and a crucial step for us to fostering inclusivity and empowering women in the financial service industry. And thank you once again for being part of this section. And I wish everyone an amazing and a successful career. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Bukola.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for having us.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.